In a certain city dwelt Martin Avdiyeich, the cobbler. He lived in a cellar, a wretched little hole with a single window. The window looked up towards the street, and through it Martin could just see the passers-by. It is true that he could see little more than their boots, but Martin Avdiyeich could read a man's character by his boots, so he needed no more. Martin Avdiyeich had lived long in that one place, and had many acquaintances. Few indeed were the boots in that neighborhood which had not passed through his hands at some time or other. On some he would fasten new soles, to others he would give side pieces, others again he would stitch all round, and even give them new uppers if need be. And often he saw his own handiwork through the window. There was always lots of work for him, for Avdiyeich's hand was cunning, and his leather was good. Nor did he overcharge, and he always kept his word. He always engaged to do a job by a fixed time if he could. But if he could not, he said so at once, and deceived no one. So everyone knew Avdiyeich, and he had no lack of work. Avdiyeich had always been a pretty good man, but as he grew old, he began to think more about his soul, and draw nearer to his God. While Martin was still a journeyman, his wife had died, but his wife had left him a little boy, 3 years old. Their other children had not lived. All the eldest had died early. Martin wished at first to send his little child into the country to his sister, but afterwards he thought better of it. My Kapitushka, he thought, will feel miserable in a strange household. He shall stay here with me. And so Avdiyeich left his master, and took to living in lodgings alone with his little son. But God did not give Avdiyeich happiness in his children. No sooner had the little one begun to grow up, and be a help and a joy to his father's heart, than Kapitoshka fell sick, took to his bed, lay there in a raging fever for a week, and then died. Martin buried his son in despair. So desperate was he that he began to murmur against God. Such disgust of life overcame him, that he more than once begged God that he might die, and he reproached God for not taking him, an old man, instead of his darling only son. And after that, Avdiyeich left off going to church. And then one day, there came to Avdiyeich from the Troitsa monastery an aged peasant pilgrim. It was already the 8th year of his pilgrimage. Avdiyeich fell to talking with him, and began to complain of his great sorrow. As for living any longer, O man of God, he said, I do not desire it. Would only that I might die. That is my sole prayer to God. I am now a man who has no hope. And the old man said to him, Your speech, Martin, is not good. How shall we judge the doings of God? God's judgments are not our thoughts. God willed that your son should die, but that you should live. Therefore it was the best thing, both for him and for you. It is because you would have lived for your own delight that you now despair. But then, what is a man to live for? Asked Avdiyeich. And the old man answered him, For God, Martin. He gave you life, and for him therefore must you live. When you begin to live for him, you will grieve about nothing else, and all things will come easy to you. Martin was silent for a moment, and then he said, And how must one live for God? Christ has shown us the way. You know how to read. Buy the Gospels and read. There you will find out how to live for God. There everything is explained. These words made Avdiyeich's heart burn within him, and he went the same day and bought for himself a New Testament printed in very large type, and began to read. Avdiyeich set out with the determination to read it only on holidays. But as he read, it did his heart so much good that he took to reading it every day. And the second time he read until all the kerosene in the lamp had burnt itself out, and still he could not tear himself away from the book. And so it was every evening. And the more he read, the more clearly he understood what God wanted of him, and how it behooved him to live for God, and his heart grew lighter and lighter continually. Formerly, whenever he lay down to sleep, he would only sigh and groan, and think of nothing but Kapitoshka. But now he would only say to himself, "Glory to thee, O Lord, thy will be done." From that day on, the whole life of Avdieyich was changed. Formerly, whenever he had a holiday, he would go to the tavern to drink tea, nor would he say no to a drop of brandy now and again. He would tipple with his comrades, and, though not actually drunk, would, for all that, leave the inn a bit merry, babbling nonsense and talking loudly and censoriously. He was done with all that now. His life became quiet and joyful. With the morning light, he sat down to his work, worked out his time, then took down his lamp from the hook, placed it on the table, took down his book from the shelf, bent over it, and sat down to read. And the more he read, the more he understood, and his heart grew brighter and happier. It happened once that Martin was up reading till very late. He was reading St. Luke's Gospel. He was reading the 6th chapter, and as he read he came to the words, "And to him that smiteth thee on the one cheek, offer also the other." This passage he read several times, and presently he came to that place where the Lord says, "And why call ye me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? Whosoever cometh to me, and heareth my sayings, and doeth them, I will show you to whom he is like. He is like a man which built an house, and dug deep, and laid the foundations on a rock. And when the flood arose, the storm beat vehemently upon that house, and could not shake it, for it was founded upon a rock. But he that heareth, and doeth not, is like a man that, without a foundation, built an house upon the earth, against which the stream did beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great." Avdieyich read these words through and through, and his heart was glad. He took off his glasses, laid them on the book, rested his elbow on the table, and fell to thinking. And he began to measure his own life by these words. And he thought to himself, "Is my house built on the rock or on the sand? How good to be as on a rock! How easy it all seems to you sitting here alone. It seems as if you were doing God's will to the fullest. And so you take no heed and fall away again. And yet you should go on striving, for it is good for you. O Lord, help me." Thus he thought, and would have laid down, but it was a grief to tear himself away from the book. And so he began reading the 7th chapter. He read all about the centurion, he read all about the widow's son, he read all about the answer to the disciples of St. John. And so he came to that place where the rich Pharisee invites our Lord to be his guest. And he read all about how the woman who was a sinner anointed his feet and washed them with her tears, and how he forgave her. And so he came at last to the 44th verse, and there he read these words, "And he turned to the woman, and said to Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house. Thou gavest me no water for my feet. But she has washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss. But this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. Mine head with oil thou didst not anoint." And again Avdieyich took off his glasses, and laid them on the book, and fell to thinking. So it is quite plain that I too have something of the Pharisee about me. Am I not always thinking of myself? Am I not always thinking of drinking tea, and keeping myself as warm and cozy as possible, without thinking at all about the guest? Simon thought about himself, but did not give the slightest thought to his guest. But who was the guest? The Lord himself. And suppose he were to come to me, should I treat him as the Pharisee did? and Avdiyeich leaned both his elbows on the table, and, without perceiving it, fell asleep. Martin. It was as though the voice of someone close to his ear. Martin started up from his nap. "Who's there?" He turned round, gazed at the door, but there was no one. Again he dozed off. Suddenly he heard quite plainly, "Martin, Martin, I say, look tomorrow into the street. I am coming." Martin awoke, rose from his chair, and began to rub his eyes. And he did not know himself whether he had heard these words asleep or awake. He turned down the lamp and laid down to sleep. At dawn the next day, Avdiyeich rose, prayed to God, lit his stove, got ready his gruel and cabbage soup, filled his samovar, put on his apron, and sat down by his window to work. There Avdiyeich sat and worked, and thought of nothing but the things of last night. His thoughts were divided. He thought at one time that he must have been dozing off. And then again he thought he really must have heard that voice. It might have been so, he thought. Martin sat at the window, and looked as much at the window as at his work, and whenever a strange pair of boots passed by, he bent forward and looked out of the window so as to see the face as well as the feet of the passers-by. The house porter passed by in new felt boots. The water carrier passed by. And after that there passed close to the window an old soldier, one of Nicholas's veterans, in tattered old boots, with a shovel in his hands. Avdiyeich knew him by his boots. The old fellow was called Stepanich, and lived with the neighboring shopkeeper, who housed him out of charity. His duty was to help the porter. Stepanich stopped before Avdiyeich's window to sweep away the snow. Avdiyeich cast a glance at him, and then went on working as before. "I'm not growing wiser as I grow older," thought Avdiyeich with some self-contempt. "I make up my mind that Christ is coming to me, and it's only Stepanich clearing away the snow. You simpleton, you! You are wool-gathering." Then Avdiyeich made 10 more stitches, and then he stretched his head once more towards the window. He looked through the window again, and there he saw that Stepanich had placed the shovel against the wall, and was warming himself and taking a rest. "The old man is very broken down," thought Avdiyeich to himself. "It is quite plain that he has scarcely strength enough to scrape away the snow. Suppose I make him drink a little tea. The samovar, too, is just boiling." Avdiyeich put down his awl, got up, placed the samovar on the table, put some tea in it, and tapped on the window with his fingers. Stepanich turned round and came to the window. Avdiyeich beckoned to him, and then went and opened the door. "Come in and warm yourself a bit," cried he. "You're a little chilled, huh?" "God bless you! Yes, and all my bones ache too," said Stepanich. Stepanich came in, shook off the snow, and began to wipe his feet so as not to soil the floor, but he tottered sadly. "Don't trouble about wiping your feet. I'll rub it off myself. It's all in the day's work. Come in and sit down," said Avdiyeich. "Here, take a cup of tea." And Avdiyeich filled 2 cups, and gave one to his guest, and he poured his own tea out into the saucer and began to blow on it. Stepanich drank his cup, turned it upside down, put a gnawed crust on top of it, and said, "Thank you." But it was quite plain that he wanted to be asked to have some more. "Have a drop more. Do," said Avdiyeich, and poured out fresh cups for his guest and himself. And as Avdiyeich drank his cup, he could not help glancing at the window from time to time. "Do you expect anyone?" asked his guest. "Do I expect anyone? Well, honestly, I hardly know. I am expecting, and I am not expecting, and there's a word which has burnt itself right into my heart. Whether it was a vision or not, I do not know. Look now. I was reading yesterday about our little Father Christ, how he suffered, how he came on earth. You have heard of him?"
"I have heard, replied Stepanich. "But we poor ignorant ones do not know how to read."
Anyhow, I was reading about this very thing, how he came down upon earth. I was reading how he went to the Pharisee, and how the Pharisee did not meet him halfway. That was what I was reading about yesterday, little brother. I read that very thing, and thought about how the honorable Pharisee did not receive our little Father Christ honorably. But suppose, I thought, if he came to someone like me, would I receive him? Simon, at any rate, did not receive him at all. So I thought, and so thinking fell asleep. I fell asleep, I say, and I heard my name called. I started up. A voice was whispering at my ear. "Look out tomorrow," it said. "I am coming." And so it happened twice. Now look, would you believe it? The idea stuck to me. Oh, I scold myself for my foolishness. And yet I look for him, our little Father Christ. Stepanich shook his head and said nothing, but he drank his cup dry and put it aside. Then Avdiyeich took up the cup and filled it again. "Drink some more. It will do you good." Now it seems to me that when our little Father went about on earth, he despised no one, but looked to the simple folk most of all. He was always among the common folk. Those disciples of his, too, he chose most of them from amongst our fellow laborers, sinners like ourselves. "He that exalteth himself," he says, "shall be abased, and he that abaseth himself shall be exalted. Ye, says he, call me Lord, and I, says he, wash your feet. He who would be the first among you," he says, "let him become the servant of all." And therefore it is that he says, "Blessed are the lowly, the peacemakers, the humble, and the long-suffering." Stepanich forgot his tea. He was an old man, soft-hearted and tearful. He sat and listened, and the tears rolled down his cheeks. "Come, drink a little more," said Avdiyeich. But Stepanich crossed himself, expressed his thanks, pushed away his cup, and got up. "I thank you, Martin Avdiyeich. I have fared well at your hands, and you have refreshed me both in body and soul." "You will do me a kindness by coming again. I am so glad to have a guest," said Avdiyeich. Stepanich left, and Martin poured out the last drop of tea, drank it, washed up, and again sat down by the window to work. He had some back-stitching to do. He stitched, and now and then cast glances at the window. He was looking for Christ, and could think of nothing but him and his works. And the various sayings of Christ were in his head all the time. 2 soldiers passed by, one in regimental boots, the other in boots of his own making. After that, the owner of the next house passed by in nicely brushed galoshes. A baker with a basket also passed by. All these passed by in turn, and then there came along the window a woman in worsted stockings and rustic shoes, and as she was passing by, she stopped short in front of the partition wall. Avdiyeich looked up at her from his window, and he saw that the woman was a stranger and poorly dressed, and that she had a little child with her. She was leaning up against the wall with her back to the wind, and tried to wrap the child up, but she had nothing to wrap it up with. The woman wore summer clothes, and they were very thin. And from out of his corner Avdiyeich heard the child crying, and the woman trying to comfort it, but she could not. Then Avdiyeich got up, went out of the door and onto the steps, and cried out, "My good woman! My good woman!" The woman heard him and turned round. "Why do you stand out in the cold there with the child? Come inside. In the warm room you will be able to better tend him, This way." The woman was amazed. What she saw was an old fellow in an apron and with glasses on his nose, calling to her. She came towards him. They went down the steps together. They went into the room. The old man led the woman to the bed. "There," said he. "Sit down, my dear, nearer to the stove, and warm and feed your little one." He went to the table, got some bread and a dish, opened the oven door, took out a pot of gruel, but it was not quite ready, put some cabbage soup into the dish, and placed it on the table. Then he fetched the bread, took down the cloth from the hook, and spread it on the table. "Sit down and have something to eat, my dear," said he, "and I will sit down a little with the youngster. I have had children of my own, and know how to manage them." The woman crossed herself, sat down at the table, and began to eat, and Avdiyeich sat down on the bed with the child. Avdiyeich smacked his lips at him again and again, but his lack of teeth made it a clumsy joke at best. And all the time the child never left off shrieking. Then Avdiyeich hit upon the idea of shaking his finger at him. So he snapped his fingers up and down, backwards and forwards, right in front of the child's mouth. He did not put his finger into its mouth because his finger was black and sticky with cobbler's wax. And the child stared at the finger and was silent, and presently it began to laugh. And Avdiyeich was delighted. But the woman went on eating, and told him who she was and where she came from. "I am a soldier's wife," she said. "My husband of 8 months, they drove right away from me, and nothing has been heard of him since. I took a cook's place till I became a mother. They could not keep me and the child. It is now 3 months since I have been drifting about without any home. I have eaten away everything I have. I wanted to be a wet nurse, but people wouldn't have me. You are too thin, they said. I have just been to the merchant's wife, where our grandmother lives, and there they promised to take me in. I thought it was all right, but she told me to come again in a week. But she lives a long way off. I'm chilled to death, and my baby is quite tired out. But God be praised, our landlady has compassion on us, and gives us shelter for Christ's sake. If it weren't for that, I don't know how we could live through it all." Avdiyeich sighed and said, "And have you no warm clothes?" "Ah, kind friend, this is indeed warm clothes time. But yesterday I pawned away my last shawl for 2 grivenki. The woman went to the bed and took up the child, but Avdiyeich stood up, went to the wall cupboard, rummaged about a bit, and then brought back with him an old jacket. "Look," said he, "it is a shabby thing, it's true, but it will do to wrap up in." The woman looked at the old jacket, then she gazed at the old man, and, taking the jacket, began to cry. Avdiyeich also turned away, crawled under the bed, drew out a trunk, and seemed to be very busy about it, whereupon he again sat down opposite the woman. Then the woman said, "Christ repay thee, dear little man. It is plain that it was he who sent me by your window. When I first came out it was warm, and now it has turned very cold. And he it was who made you look out of the window and have compassion on poor me." Avdiyeich smiled slightly and said, "Yes, he must have done it, for I looked not out of the window in vain, my dear." And Avdiyeich told his dream to the soldier's wife also, and how he had heard the voice promising that the Lord should come to him that day. "All things are possible," said the woman. Then she rose up, put on the jacket, wrapped it round her little one, and then began to bow and thank Avdiyeich once more. "Take this, for Christ's sake," said Avdiyeich, giving her a 2 grivenka piece, "and redeem your shawl." The woman crossed herself, Avdiyeich crossed himself, and then he led the woman to the door. The woman went out. Avdiyeich ate up the remainder of the cabbage soup, washed up, and again sat down to work. He worked on and on, but he did not forget the window, and whenever the window was darkened, he immediately looked up to see who was passing by. Acquaintances passed, strangers passed, but there was no one in particular. But now Avdiyeich saw how, right in front of his window, an old woman, a huckster, had taken up her stand. She carried a basket of apples. Not many now remained. She had evidently sold nearly all of them. Across her shoulder she carried a sack full of wood shavings. She must have picked them up near some new building, and was taking them home with her. It was plain that the sack was straining her shoulder. She wanted to shift it onto the other shoulder, so she rested the sack on the pavement, placed the apple basket on a small post, and set about shaking down the shavings in the sack. Now while she was shaking down the sack, an urchin in a ragged cap suddenly turned up, goodness knows from where, grabbed at one of the apples in the basket, and would have run away with it, but the wary old woman turned quickly round and grabbed the youth by the sleeve. The boy fought and tried to tear himself loose, but the old woman seized him hard with both hands, knocked his hat off, and pulled hard at his hair. The lad howled, and the old woman yelled at him. Avdiyeich did not stop to put away his awl, but pitched it on the floor, rushed into the courtyard, and in his haste stumbled on the steps and dropped his glasses. Avdiyeich ran out into the street. The old woman was pulling at the boy's hair, and wanted to drag him off to the police, while the boy fought and kicked. "I didn't take it," said he. "What are you hitting me for? Let me go." Avdiyeich came up and tried to part them. He seized the boy by the arm and said, "Let him go. Forgive him, for God's sake." "I'll forgive him so that he shan't forget the taste of a paddle. I mean to take the rascal to the police station." Avdiyeich began to entreat with the old woman. "Let him go, little mother. He will not do it any more. Let him go for Christ's sake." The old woman let him go. The boy would have run off, but Avdiyeich held him fast. "Beg the little mother's pardon," said he, "and don't do such things any more. I saw you take it." Then the boy began to cry and beg pardon. "Well, that's all right. And now, there's an apple for you." And Avdiyeich took one out of the basket and gave it to the boy. "I'll pay you for it, little mother," he said to the old woman. "You will ruin them that way, the little rascals," said the old woman. "If I had to reward him, he would not be able to sit down for a week." "Oh, little mother," cried Avdiyeich. "That is our way of looking at things, but it is not God's way. If he ought to be whipped so for the sake of one apple, what do we deserve for our sins?" The old woman was silent. And Avdiyeich told the old woman about the parable of the master who forgave his servant a very great debt, and how the servant immediately went out and caught his fellow servant by the throat, because he was his debtor. The old woman listened to the end, and the boy listened too. "God told us to forgive," said Avdiyeich. "Otherwise, he will not forgive us. We must forgive everyone, especially the thoughtless." The old woman shook her head and sighed. "That's all very well," she said, "but they are spoiled enough already." "Then it is for us old people to teach them better," said Avdiyeich. "So say I," replied the old woman. "I had 7 of them at one time, and now I have but a single daughter left." And the old woman began telling him where and how she lived with her daughter, and how many grandchildren she had. "I'm not what I was," she said, "but I work all I can. I am sorry for my grandchildren, and they are good children too. No one is so glad to see me as they are. Little Aksyutka will go to none but me. Grandma dear, darling Grandma." And the old woman was melted into tears. "As for him," she added, pointing to the boy, "boys will be boys, I suppose. Well, God bless him." Now just as the old woman was about to hoist the sack onto her shoulder, the boy rushed forward and said, "Give it here." I'll carry it for you, Granny. I'm going that way myself." And the old woman shook her head, but she did put the sack on the lad's shoulder. And so they trudged down the street together side by side. And the old woman forgot to ask Avdiyeich for the money for the apple. Avdiyeich kept standing and looking after them, and heard how they talked to each other as they went about all sorts of things. Avdiyeich followed them with his eyes till they were out of sight. Then he turned homewards, and found his glasses on the steps. They were not broken, picked up his awl, and sat down to work again. He worked away for a little while, but soon he was scarcely able to distinguish the stitches, and he saw the lamplighter going round to light the lamps. "I see it is time to light up," thought he. So he trimmed his little lamp, lighted it, and again sat down to work. He finished one boot completely, turned it round and inspected it. "Good," he cried. He put away his tools, swept up the cuttings, removed the brushes and tips, put away the awl, took down the lamp, placed it on the table, and took down the Gospels from the shelf. He wanted to find the passage where he had last evening placed a strip of morocco leather by way of a bookmark, but he came upon another place. And just as Avdiyeich opened the Gospel, he remembered his dream of last evening. And no sooner did he call it to mind, than it seemed to him as if some persons were moving about and shuffling their feet behind him. Avdiyeich glanced round, and saw that somebody was indeed standing in the dark corner. Yes, someone was really there, but who he could not exactly make out. Then a voice whispered in his ear, "Martin, Martin, do you not know me?" "Who are you?" cried Avdiyeich. "It is I," cried the voice. "Lo, it is I." And forth from the dark corner stepped Stepanich. He smiled, and it was as though a little cloud were breaking, and he was gone. "It is I," cried the voice, and forth from the corner stepped a woman with a little child, and the woman smiled, and the child laughed, and they also disappeared. "And it is I," cried the voice, and the old woman and the boy with the apple stepped forth, and both of them smiled, and they also disappeared. And the heart of Avdiyeich was glad. He crossed himself, put on his glasses, and began to read the Gospels at the place where he had opened them. And at the top of the page he read these words, "And I was hungry and thirsty, and ye gave me to drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in." And at the bottom of the page he read this, "Inasmuch as ye have done it to the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." And Avdiyeich understood that his dream had not deceived him, and that the Saviour had really come to him that day, and he had really received him.